Schweitzer, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So it's exactly 20 years to what I will describe, and you will probably agree, the most effective terror attack ever, the 9/11.
Yeah.
Explain why. What was so different in that terror attack? Because we've seen so many.
No, there are a lot of things. First of all, the number of casualties. The lethality was immense, unimaginable. Second, it was very audacious because nobody dares to attack United States in such a fashion, definitely not the terror organizations. Third, the unique modus operandi they choose. And I think the repercussions were a shock, a devastating shock for the United States, and it caused a very devastating reaction, almost gut reaction from the United States, which eventually led to the staying of the United States for 20 years as a conquering force in Afghanistan. And eventually the defeat was not a happy one because there are no happy defeats, no happy retreats.
I want to take you backwards, before 9/11. The writing, as we say, cliche or not, was on the wall. Al-Qaeda was attacking the US beforehand in Tanzania, in Kenya. The Americans knew what Al-Qaeda and Bin Laden is all about, and still they prefer to ignore.
Since I'm making this journey of 20 years, I know very profoundly how some of the Americans knew, some of the intelligence knew. But there is a difference between knowing, understanding, comprehending, and taking in. The leadership didn't take it in. So even though there were people from the intelligence community, including a briefing that was given to the president, the leadership of the United States didn't pay attention, didn't inhale it, and didn't believe that it would become such a horror.
Is it a psychological thing, an operational thing?
It's a combination because the intelligence didn't provide a specific warning, just a general one. Second, it was a failure of imagination. Third, it was a decision, maybe a rightful decision by the leadership to go and to deal with other things rather than to deal with the intelligence alert, which was not specific. So eventually, all this combination, plus the fact that the intelligence services didn't talk openly with each other, the famous or infamous wall was a very crucial factor.
And is it a presidential thing? A different president at the same time, a president who was not a cadet, he just started, but a more veteran one, or a Democrat or a Republican, would it make any difference?
No one can tell. I think it's a matter of personality, of the way of the intelligence, and mainly the very close inner circles of the president, who are responsible to bring to its attention very, very directly and very, very alertingly the fact that you have something that you need to deal with. And even then, because of the other failures of the wall, of this conversation between the agency, this connection of the dots, that brought to the fora the hazard and the disaster.
So let's speak about post 9/11. America was in trauma, obviously, went to Afghanistan, later to Iraq, trying to change the world. But the world didn't actually learn the lesson of fighting terrorism, because 15 years later, we received ISIS doing more or less the same, fighting the world, and the world found itself surprised over again.
Let's be frank. No one in the human field can see as it sees in high insight. I think Daesh and ISIS, the Islamic State, is a different phenomenon. This was a concrete intelligence, bureaucratic failure, and the president didn't inhale the alerts that were coming. He didn't have anything to work with. Later on, I think it was a different failure. I think the world, in a sense, what is the world, but in a sense, learned lessons, understand, maybe even overreacted to terrorism. I think it's a different kind of failures.
So Let's speak about the latter one, about IS, about the Islamic State. What did they study from the Al Qaeda case? Because Al Qaeda didn't want to conquer the world. ISIS wanted to.
Look, ISIS first of all surprised Zawahiri. Zawahiri himself was surprised to find out that there was a rebellious organization that was defying his authority. So even
came from within.
From within. I think the process of the build-up from Daesh, from the Islamic State in Iraq to Daesh to the Islamic State was a gradual one and could have been perceived by others. And let's remember, the West didn't wake up until 1 year later, at least 1 year later, to consolidate this international coalition, because the Western world believed that it was an inner issue until it became an international one.
So let's go back to Al Qaeda. What's their status today? Or I'll even broaden the question and ask you, did they succeed or not? Because eventually they brought down the Twin Towers in New York, the World Trade Center. They've hit the Pentagon. They've taken the US on its knees. But Al Qaeda nearly doesn't exist 20 years later. So maybe it wasn't a success, but a failure.
We need to have more nuanced perspective on Al Qaeda, and definitely on whether they succeeded or failed. According to their perception, or some of their perceptions, because there are also different of opinions within Al Qaeda, within the circles of Al Qaeda, they succeeded because for them, the time frame is different. For them, there is a guaranteed, assured victory at the end. So when they looked at the 9/11 and the impact of the 9/11, the ramifications of the 9/11, the fact that the United States was dragged voluntarily or involuntarily to be involved in two very lucrative, very bloody wars, it's a total success, even though Al Qaeda suffered the consequences. So for them, it's success. On the other hand, if you look at the other side, again with the complicated term of success in fighting terrorism, the fact that Al Qaeda didn't succeed in carrying out the same magnitude of attack or attacks was a success on the West side. Looking at Al Qaeda itself, some say dispersed, some say metastasized, but looking at bin Laden's perspective, it was intentfully architected in this way. So the fact that there are affiliates of Al Qaeda that are operative all over the world, for them it's success, and even they grew in numbers. So they still exist, the idea exists, and they are just waiting, Al Qaeda or others, including Daesh and others, for an opportunity to revive and to start again. I think that the components are there, the desire is there, the belief is there. We need to understand their way of thinking. I think they will try to overcome the obstacles that the West put in and try to use the tools that the West developed against the West.
You're a very experienced intelligence person from the Army intelligence, till now being a researcher. I want to take you back to 9/11. You saw those airplanes hitting the towers. What were your first thoughts?
I think I had the same thoughts of those who dealt with it in those days. Everybody who dealt with the issues of terrorism, of Al Qaeda, and I did in various capacities, knew after the second plane hit that it was Al Qaeda. There was no question in our mind. I was interviewed the same night. I was very cautious not to say it decisively, but I knew it.
In looking currently, you say to yourself, what should be done to prevent the next 9/11?
Again, to understand that the next, probably the next 9/11 will not be in the same fashion. To be constantly watching the nuances and the developments in these circles of the Sunnite and the Shiites circles, and maybe there will be others, not from this current of philosophy of belief, that will try to use the new tools to carry out a catastrophic attack, whether it will be in a terrorist form whether it will be in the cyberspace form, whether it will be in the non-conventional form. This is something that we need to watch because we have enough people who want to destroy the system from various currents of thoughts that are looking for such events.
And last question, the latest that happened in Afghanistan, does it strengthen the world of terrorism, such possibilities, or maybe it weakens them because it's a new Taliban and a new Afghanistan, and they've also learned the lessons that they paid a very heavy price for Al-Qaeda's ambitions?
We don't know how it will develop. There are these two options, and there are probably others that you mentioned, but I think that we need to understand the power of ethos and mythos. And they believe, no matter what you will say, and we can expand from here to UPITS, that the United States withdrew from Afghanistan not because of the pressure of the terror, but because it was their decision to go to other areas to counter China. But for them, the ethos and the mythos is that a very determined, small believers from the Islamic fundamentalist current have defeated again a superpower. That's what remains. And we already seen, not only among the Sunnite extremist circles, but also from the Shiites and others that are celebrating the American defeat, and it's very highly encouraged them.
רק נתק שנייה, אנחנו נסיים עוד שאלה אחת.
אתה רוצה את המשפט סיום רק?
אפשר תכף לגמגם את זה עוד פעם.
רק את הסיום.
כן, תגיד רק את המשפט הזה עוד פעם.
כן.
שמהזה שהם רואים כוח קטן מביס מעצמה גדולה.
There is no question the inspiration of the alleged defeat of a superpower, a Christian superpower, by the hands of handful of very determined Islamists. It's a highly inspirational ethos for many organizations from the Shiite, Sunnites and others, and they will probably try to emulate it.
And that's a very disturbing conclusion.
Yeah, it is.
Yoram Schweitzer, thanks so much as always for joining me today.
Thank you very much.